This is Adam Malone. I'm on the Culture Matters podcast with Chris.
Good morning, Alan. Uh, why do I say Alan?
I don't know, but that's my dad's name.
I knew something was there, and I don't know. So sorry, Adam. I told you in the beginning I was confused because I have done two interviews with two Adams, and now I want to call you Alan. So I'm going to stick with Adam for now. Adam, welcome to the show. Do us a favor and tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, where you are, and and what else? Where you are? What time is it actually? Because I have no idea where you are, to be honest. And what is your so-called cultural frame of reference?
Sure. So, Adam Malone, I'm an expert in trust. And so I work with teams on trying to help them understand how to weave the fabric of trust between peers, leaders, and external partners. Where I am geographically is Nashville, Tennessee, in the United States.
Uh-huh.
And it is 8:30 in the morning or 8:45 in the morning,
Mhm.
which I assume that means it's something like 2 in your afternoon. Is that right?
It's quarter to four here.
Oh, quarter to 4. Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
yeah.
All right.
I'm recording
Um,
this. I'm recording this from the Netherlands in this case, and from a public library because they're breaking down the building. I just couldn't. I mean, the fillings in my teeth were actually coming out, I swear. So it's been quite a day. Anyways, all right.
um,
In Tennessee
my
you are.
yeah. And you asked about my cultural frame of reference.
Yes, sir.
So my cultural frame of reference, I think it really started or was heavily impacted when I was quite young. So my family has lived all over the southern United States when we were in the US.
No.
But when I was 10, we moved to Vietnam. And so that was really, you took a boy from Mississippi and kind of showed him the world. And in that trip, I got to spend time in Hong Kong, time in South Korea, and then we spent multiple years in Vietnam. And so that really is the beginning of when I started to think about the fact that there was a difference in cultures. Before that, I'd kind of always been around people like me, so I just always assumed that
Mhm.
people were like me or in a situation like me, and that was the beginning of that eye opening. um, and then in school I was blessed to do a double major, so I learned Spanish in university. And so my first job out of university was about 70% in Spanish. Sadly, my Spanish has gone by the wayside, but because of that, I got to work with people in Colombia and Mexico. I had clients in other international destinations like Norway and Italy. Worked with people in New Zealand and Australia. So I had a real international experience very early in my career. And then the last, call it 7 years of my corporate work before I left to do consulting, was very international, focused in Japan,
Mhm.
Hong Kong, and then most especially in the Philippines.
Okay. Then and you said you were 10 when you moved to Vietnam?
Yes, sir.
And how long did you stay there?
We were there for 2 years.
2 years. Okay. And so then I think when you're 10 years old, you're old enough to have a recollection. And you're also older or young enough still to take life as it is. Is that
Yeah.
true?
Oh, yeah. It definitely is. We were we knew the other family, but we were the second family to move into Vietnam
Mhm.
when they had naturalized a relationship with the U.S. where Americans could actually, get long-term visas and move there.
Mhm.
So we were, before that, the only non-Asian people that were in Vietnam were generally Russians.
Mhm.
And so we were some of the first people that were not Russian and not Vietnamese that lived there. and there were just all kinds of cultural things that you get exposure to. But you're right, it's very, you just kind of learn to go with the flow pretty quickly.
Mhm.
um but it's definitely interesting at 10 when you've spent all of your life being with people that are similar to you, to then go and be dropped into a country where we were very visibly different.
Yeah.
And
Visibly even.
uh
Physically
yeah,
as well.
visibly,
Visibly,
right.
exactly.
Yeah. And so it's not just the culture that we lived in, it was everyone could look at us down the street and know that, we weren't from around we weren't from
Mhm.
around there.
Yeah. Yeah. Is did you go through something called culture shock?
Yes, for
Can,
sure.
can quickly explain what happened and what culture shock is or what it did to you?
Yeah, so culture shock is just going to be any time that you go into a different culture. In this case, we're talking about living in a
Mhm.
country, but I think you can go through culture shock when you're moving companies, for example.
Yeah.
But it's going to be where you have become acclimatized to a certain way of living and working and conducting yourself, and you're put into a culture that may be at odds with that. and
Hmm.
and so cultural norms are part of that, right? So in the US we are very orderly and like line oriented.
Hmm.
So if we're in a queue to get into a grocery store or to pay or to do something like that, everyone's very orderly. In Asia, completely different. You'd everyone kind of presses in. This was especially true 30 years ago.
Hmm.
Presses in, and you have to actually kind of push your way to the front of many lines, and people will cut in front of you. And just in the US, we would consider that extremely rude and kind of don't know how to handle it.
Hmm.
There, it's just natural. It's how everyone does their work, and does lives their life. Or another example, when we'd go out to eat with friends, if a dish, most restaurants there at that point were family style. And so, everyone would have their own rice bowl, and
Hmm.
then dishes to share would be put in the middle of the table. Well, a common courtesy there was that if something was served and Chris, I thought you would enjoy it, that I would use my chopsticks and give you some of the food from that bowl.
Right.
Well, I mean, again, in the US, using the utensils I've been eating with to serve
Hmm.
is highly rude. We don't consider it sanitary.
Hmm.
Um, but it's actually part of kindness and showing care and concern. And so there's just all kinds of things like that, whether professional or personal, that when you go into a culture that is very different, it can be shocking to the point where you actually feel lost because you don't know how to conduct yourself, and you feel under attack in some ways because people are doing things that in your upbringing or your professional life are completely wrong, but
Hmm.
wrong is all established by
Yeah.
the culture you've grown up in.
Yeah. No, that's true. Is it, then I'm going to move on because I like the subject of culture shock as well. Is it something you get used to eventually, or did you get used to it? As in, okay, in other words, you learn how to adapt and you learn how to fit in or at least adjust to some extent.
Yeah, you definitely do. um, there's going to be things for all of us where we just can't get there. So an example of that is the sharing of utensils. So
Yeah.
in my parents' house, we had conversations with our friends that told them, "Hey, we understand this is part of your culture. We actually don't think it's sanitary. So our preference is that you don't serve us with your utensils. Here we have shared utensils, so you can still serve me, and I can serve you, but let's make a slight adjustment
Right.
so that it is, from our opinion, more sanitary in those
Yeah.
things."
Yeah.
And so I think it's a constant give and take between what can I live with and abide by, and where do I need to engage in such a way to maybe shift what's happening, and ideally be open enough that I explain that to the people I'm dealing with. Hey, this is why I'm doing this. It would make me more comfortable, or there's a reason for it. is that something that you think we can do, and kind of engage the other person in that interaction.
Right. Okay, good point. Thanks for explaining. So you spoke Spanish.
Yeah, yeah.
I said,
I,
yeah, go ahead.
the company I was at for 17 years, I did very, very little in my Spanish. That was after that first job.
Okay.
And the only thing I've ever been kind of sad about is that it meant that my Spanish went by the wayside. So yeah,
Yeah.
I could not conduct 70% of my business in Spanish these days for sure.
But now you are a tenacious operator. What is that?
Well, the idea of tenacity and resilience is that you don't give up, that you are focused on achieving what needs to be done.
Mhm.
And the operator piece, I spent 7 years leading supply chain operations. And I think when you consider someone who has an operations background, just tenacity is super important. You don't know what's going to happen from day to day.
Mhm.
It can be a problem with your supplier, or weather in airport hub. Like for us, if there was a snowstorm in Louisville, Kentucky,
Mhm.
that's where all of our UPS shipments went through, and so it would throw everything into chaos. And so the tenacious operator name for my company is, I just believe that you have to bring a high level of tenacity to everything you do.
Mhm.
And part of that is developing that tenacity and resilience in yourself. But as leaders, we have to focus on developing it in the team structure, not just in the individual.
Hmm. Okay. So is this, well, no, but I should maybe ask a question but rather than stumbling. You led a global team of 4,000 people. This is
Yeah.
from your LinkedIn profile, right? And how global was that? And with that, what were your biggest challenges? And did tenacity come out of that, or were you applying that during that running
Yeah.
global company?
So in terms of how global the team was, the majority of the team was in the Philippines.
Uh-huh.
We had some team members in Latin America, had a very small number of team members in the UK, but most were either in the US or in the Philippines.
What kind of
Although
business was
sometimes
that?
a cell phone insurance company called Assurian,
Okay.
so the largest cell phone protection provider in the US.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the tenacity definitely was a part of that, and it came out in the way you interact with the team of how can you be tenacious, how can you press for results, but that doesn't mean you can break the team. So how do you tenacity isn't just forcing team performance and we're going to work 80 hours and that's what it means to be resilient, but instead how do you develop a team and a team structure that when chaos happens in
Mm-hmm.
day-to-day life and operations, how is the team built and structured, and the culture that you develop, how does it absorb those blows and kind of distribute that energy so that everyone can really survive and thrive kind of despite what's happening to the team, and the team is structured
Mm-hmm.
to absorb that and distribute the work and the stress that comes from it.
So that tenacity was something you were using when you were working with this or the global team, if you want. How does it
Yeah.
differ in different cultures? I mean, how do Filipinos react, or how are Filipinos tenacious compared to Colombians or Americans?
I, I don't know that I've ever thought about comparing tenacity. Um, I would say the a cultural difference is team members in the US are highly dedicated,
Hmm.
but there's a different level of expectation around how does my workday look, for example,
Hmm.
versus in some cultures like the Philippines, they are often very deferential to especially outsiders. And so, actually, one of the things that
What
you
do you
have
mean
to
with
be
Sorry for interrupt. What do you mean with differential in this case?
deferential, they defer
Ah, okay.
and they defer to leaders.
Right.
So, um, for example, in the US, it's pretty acceptable for team members to tell you that they're unhappy with certain working conditions, whether that's the hours or the stress or whatever. Whereas in some cultures, like the Philippines, for example, often the expectation is that we just kind of do what we're told.
Mm.
And so part of developing resilience in the team is we sometimes have to work with our US team members to understand that they may need to be more giving, more gracious in their interactions. But then to our Filipino team members, we sometimes would have to make sure they knew that we needed them to push back, that we needed them to not defer just because someone with a higher title said something. They actually needed to engage more deeply and what may be viewed as with conflict,
Mm.
to get to the best solution. And there's, every culture handles topics like conflict differently. And so, to me, that's a big way that culturally, when you're dealing with a team that spans multiple countries, especially, you need to think about how the team handles and absorbs conflict,
Mm-hmm.
because it's almost always gonna be different between countries and cultures.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. How did you solve that then, or how did you deal with that? And the reason I'm asking this is that I recently gave a workshop for a Japanese kind of Japanese pharmaceutical, and it's this is something the Westerns can't deal with saying yes to everything. I mean, at this moment, there's clear blue skies here in the Netherlands, and if I were to say it's raining, they would still say yes, it's raining and say not no, it's clear blue skies. So just the directness that is so difficult for collectivistic cultures, for it's so difficult for collectivistic cultures to be, and it's so difficult for individualistic cultures like you and I to read.
Yes. Yeah.
What is your solution?
Um, well, my solution is partly spending time together, and the more exposure we have to each other, the more we can learn how to kind of see the way the other culture operates,
Mhm.
and again give each other some grace. And so, for example, I would talk to US team members
Mhm.
about the fact that when they went to the Philippines, they needed to be very careful making statements about things that need to change or need to happen,
Okay.
because the view in the Philippines would be, hey, this director or senior director from the US is here. If they tell me I need to go do something, I should just go do it,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
And like the way that played out one time, me and another VP were talking about, we had Apple coming to visit our facility because we used Apple parts and components and had a relationship with them. As a part of that, he and I were doing a tour of the line to, just make sure things were looked good and
Yeah.
everything. And we made a comment that a wall seemed out of place, that it was that literally a wall within the facility. Well, this is kind of weird. I don't know why this is here.
Mm.
We went on along our day. The next day we came back and the wall was gone. And so overnight they had deconstructed a wall and painted, and we had to ask why, and they said, well, you said that it shouldn't be there.
Mm.
And so that was, I would say, that was one of my strongest like examples of, you don't know what will happen if you say something, and so you need to be really clear.
Yeah.
I am telling you this needs to change, versus I'm just having a conversation and observing the environment. Don't go change something. And so
Yeah.
that was, I would train my US team members, hey, be careful what you say that could come across as an order or a directive. In the US, that would never happen. There'd be 3 meetings and, a budget process and
I would
everything.
question you. I said, "Are you sure you want this wall out? Is that what you're saying?" Something like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then similarly, that Filipino team, not at that point, but later, that whole team reported to me eventually. That factory reported to me. And one of the things I worked with them and their leaders on is, hey, before you go do something, it's okay to ask questions.
Yeah.
Like we expect you to ask questions, especially if you think that something is unwise or would be bad for team morale or bad for production. Don't just do what someone else tells you to
Mhm.
do.
Got it.
Um, and that takes training both sides of that equation.
Sure, that's true. Okay, can you quickly explain? I'm gonna looking at the clock as well because I like to keep the interviews around 30 minutes more or less.
Yeah.
Um, you do trust assessments.
Yes.
What is that? How do you do that?
So a trust assessment is going to look at how does your culture and your company, your team, what's the fabric of trust look like? And
Mhm,
so that I'll do a series of interviews and questions to kind of probe on what's the level of trust within your organization.
mhm,
And some of those questions could look like um, some people may think they're a little silly. How often do meetings in your culture get canceled without a warning?
mhm.
So, like, it's 10 minutes before a meeting is supposed to happen, and then it just gets canceled and no one knows why.
Yeah.
Or how often are meetings put on your calendar last minute? And the cultural expectation is that you have to drop everything and go to them. So, trust is built of multiple components: empathy, authenticity, and logic.
Mhm,
Kind of make this trust triangle. And so I'll engage in my interviews in questions around that triangle. So, for example, those questions about, how much notice do you get when meetings are canceled? Are you expected to just drop everything if a leader says, we're going to work on this? Well, that can be a sign that there's a low empathy, like you have an empathy issue within your culture.
mhm,
Um, and also, we'll ask questions about authenticity. So, an example of that would be, how often do you feel like your leaders or peers are hiding what they actually want to know or hiding their agenda?
mhm,
Because part of being authentic is to show up agendaless, and we have clarity on that between us. Well, how often in your culture are people showing up and it's clear that they have an agenda, but they never tell you what it is? And so you're always kind of wondering, hey, what is Chris doing? How does he want me to engage in all these things? And then they disappear and you kind of never know what's going on. Well, that's an authenticity signal that you have an authenticity issue, for example.
all right. Okay, two more questions left. Adam, not
Yeah,
Alan, Adam. Can you give us 3 tips to become more culturally competent, please?
sure. Number one, ask about processes, don't ask about people. And so when you're engaging, especially if you're inspecting how something is working within your team, ask about the process that got you to this point, not whose fault is this or who did this.
Okay.
That question would look like, can you explain to me or can you teach me how this fits into your overall work process? And so that's an open-ended question that doesn't imply displeasure, and it also doesn't focus on an individual. It focuses on the process.
Good point.
The second tip would be to listen for what people aren't saying. Often, what happens is the culture can align, especially if you're working through translators, on like what the story is that everyone's going to tell you.
Mhm.
And so what you need to do is listen for what's not being said and ask questions that may not be where you are being directed to. Because lots of times, especially through a translator, there's been some agreement about how things are going to be presented or talked about. And sometimes it's helpful to listen to what's not being talked about, to ask some probing questions there. Um, and then finally, I would say, don't assume that you understand the cultural issues until you've asked questions and gotten to know the team.
Mhm.
Um, because you can make a lot of assumptions that you understand something because of a cultural difference. And, just because you've worked in one part of Japanese culture doesn't mean you understand the corporate culture in the Japanese company you're working with. Or just because you've engaged in with one company in Hong Kong or the Philippines or wherever, that doesn't mean that you know how this team or this part of that country operates. And so just just don't assume that you know
Yeah.
until you actually do.
Adam, if people want to get in touch with you, how can they do that?
Sure. My LinkedIn is the best way to get in touch with me.
Okay.
So if you'll if you'll just search Adam Malone on LinkedIn, there'll be a guy that looks just like me, but's black and white and holding a microphone, and that's me.
All right. Okay. That all will be in the show notes. Adam, thank you so much for your time and your explanations. Spot on, I would say. And I'm pretty sure we'll bump into each other in the future.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Thank you.